Kia ora tātou, nau mai, haere mai, and warm welcome everybody to our council meeting for Wednesday the 26th of June 2024 and around our long-term plan along with some other council business to deal with today. Before we get started, if I could invite Councillor Fitzgerald to open our meeting with karakia.
O tina koe te kaheka, me Grant Smith. Koutou ngā kai whakahaere me ngā kai kaunihira o te kaunihira me karakia tātou. Tūtaua mai I runga, tūtaua mai I raro, tūtaua mai I roto, tūtaua mai I waho. Kia tau ai te mauri tū, te mauri ora, ki te katoa, haumi e, hui e, tāki e.
Kia ora, thank you. Right, our meeting today is of course being recorded and is being live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. In terms of our health and safety procedures, unlike the event of an emergency, the exits are listed there through the green signs we entered. Toilets are in the link span area at the far end, and unlike the event of an evacuation, we assemble at the clock tower, Te Marahine, the square. In terms of smoking, good opportunity to stop, and you will have to do that outside. Again, unlike the event of needing a defibrillator, that is also located here in the building in the entrance way to customer services. Any incidents, please report them to our committee administration. We have, if I could just remind staff and presenters in the first instance, if they could perhaps just say their name and title for those online. And online today we have Councillor Johnson, welcome, and the Deputy Mayor as well. So we'll go through to our apologies, which is... First, before we get to apologies, yes, no, it is. Apologies is around recommendation to council that received the apologies from Councillor Johnson for early departure and the Deputy Mayor for late arrival. I'm happy to move those. Seconded by Councillor Fitzgerald.
Do you want to say something?
Oh, okay. Sorry, Councillor. Your early departure as well. Okay. Councillor Dennison, thank you for seconding that. We'll just get that up. Fitzgerald has a D on it. Okay, so moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Dennison. There being no correspondence in that, we will vote, please. And that has passed 15 votes for and none against. Thank you. Right, moving through the order of business, notification of additional items. We've got tabled items there from Audit New Zealand, but you should all have those. Declarations of interest, I haven't received any. There's nothing from the floor. Public comment, again, I haven't received any. And we then go through to our confirmation of minutes on page 7 of your papers, councillors, and that's around our meeting, extraordinary council meeting of the 10th of June 2024, part 1, public be confirmed as a true and correct record. I'm happy to move that, Councillor Dennison. Are there any matters arising, councillors? There being none, I'll ask you to vote, please. And that has passed 14 votes for and 1 abstention. Thank you. All right, we move through to number 7, which is around the adoption of the city's future development strategy, and that's on page 13 of our papers. And if I can invite Keegan Epplin-Thane and Leanna Shirley to the table, senior planners from both the city and the regional council, just to go through that. Over to you.
Tēnā koutou, kia ora Mr Mayor, kia ora elected members, kia ora Janine. My name is Keegan Epplin-Thane. I'm a senior planner in our strategic planning unit. Been involved in partway through this process and towards the latter end primarily. With me I've got Leanna Shirley, who's our manuhiri from Horizons Regional Council, but been throughout the entire future development strategy as a senior planner. Also in the gallery, I've got Rebecca Bell, who's been instrumental in providing a lot of the grunt work as far as project management of this project, and very good at stacking plates between this and the Horizons long-term plan. For the purposes of potential questions, may call on our Chief Planning Officer, David Murphy, and our City Planning Manager in the gallery, Jono Ferguson-Pye. So welcome to the entree before the main course. This is the future development strategy. Hopefully you won't need a palate cleanser in between. For those that haven't been involved in the process thus far, thank you for the giggles. This is a 30-year growth strategy in a nutshell that's required under the National Policy Statement for Urban Development. It's required to be adopted prior to the long-term plan, which is why it's up front in the order paper. This is a high-level strategy. Its purpose is to guide further investigation, not to replace the investigations that would be done otherwise in a plan change level. So it's been informed by a significant number of plan changes that we've currently got on the cards as our council. It's also been informed by previous growth strategies. Growth strategies themselves are not new. We've probably had about 5 or 6 since the 70s. And the constraints still continue to remain. This provides 2 helpful opportunities for the public. Every 3 years it's expected to get reviewed, so it brings the city at the bird's eye in terms of being able to compare the timing and priorities of growth across the city, which you otherwise are limited to consider in an individual plan change, and also provides an overall strategic basis for private plan changes to be considered. Which is quite important for some of the changes that we had made with the joint steering group through the deliberations process. This is a Generation 1 strategy, so we're expecting to have learnt a lot through what is an uncommon process as far as a joint strategic document between Horizons Regional Council and Palmy City Council. And you'll see section 5 of the memorandum points towards other work that we expect to happen between now and the next review that will enrich the strategy, notably a citywide stormwater strategy, citywide vegetation strategy and review, and the like. For the record, you'll note on page 40 of the order paper, there'll be some highlighted text in the change log, just to record changes that were made between submissions and deliberations. So we were unable to update some numbers related to capital growth programs in time for the preparation of this report. And so I'd just like to table those changes now. If you just bear with me, sorry. So there were some changes with respect to the total uninflated infrastructure cost over the 30-year period. That since needs to be changed to 616 million. And the primary change for that is just the treatment of nature calls as a special purpose vehicle as opposed to a growth program for the purposes of collecting development contributions, if you wanted to understand the methodology behind that change. Because of that exclusion from that number, we'd also ask to remove the text that relates to note nature calls wastewater project makes up over half of this figure. and then also a reduction in the number of growth programs from 128 to 55, and that's primarily to do with the consolidation of growth programs into more overarching line items, if you will. I won't labour the actual changes that were made through deliberations, but just nod to what the next steps in the process will be if this is adopted today. So we would expect to develop an implementation plan, which is expected to be reviewed annually, and that's to use existing information between the long-term plan and the future development strategy, so it shouldn't come as a surprise. That doesn't need to be consulted on under the National Policy Statement. Continue to proceed on development of a plan change to enable medium density to elevate that growing up option. And our next housing and business needs assessment would be prepared in around 2026 to inform the review of the future development strategy in 2027, which should then line up to inform your next infrastructure strategy and long-term plan. Apologies for jumping the gun, but yeah, so that's forecasting ahead. Just want to have some acknowledgements in terms of our relationship with Horizons Regional Council through the process. It was a lot of good learnings and maramatanga built between, I believe, both elected members on that panel or group, and also at the officer level. So I think it would have built better relationships for information sharing in the future. Yeah, is there anything that you'd like to say, Diana?
Just quickly, I note that yesterday the Future Development Strategy was presented to Horizons Regional Council and it was adopted. And if adopted today through Palmerston North City, we look forward to continuing the mahi as we move into the implementation plan and the review of the implementation plan and the next review of the Future Development Strategy. So thank you.
I'll take questions through the chair.
Thanks, Keegan. Leanna, thank you for that. So there's been a couple of changes, hasn't there, from what we consulted and deliberated on under 4. There's been a greater clarity around flood protection, or actually infrastructure in general, isn't it? And in terms of flood protection infrastructure, that physical flood protection infrastructure, the national grid, the national gas network as well. Yeah, okay. And we made a commitment around stormwater as well, around a strategy to be completed before the 2027 refresh of this. Can I ask how other Tier 2 cities have done this? You know, the likes of Napier, Whangarei, New Plymouth, Rotorua, perhaps, I know Nelson's a unitary, but did the others did they do it by themselves or they do it through their regional councils as well? Do you have much insight to that?
Yeah, so under the National Policy Statement for Urban Development, there's an appendix at the back that does specify what's considered a Tier 1, Tier 2 authority. And for a lot of other Tier 2 authorities, you've at least got the Regional Council and the primary urban territorial authority, and in some cases you've got multiple urban local governments to be party to that. Yeah, if that answers the question.
All right. Councillor Harper.
Thank you, and thank you for your work you've done on this for both councils. Just one question, have you had much feedback from the submitters on the changes that we had made post-deliberations?
We had some interest from the Bunnythorpe community. So one consideration from the Bunnythorpe Greater Bunnythorpe Committee was around the significance of some of the changes that were made around the Te Utanganui Master. And unlike say a Resource Management Act process where you typically get 2 cracks at a submission, you do a submission and then a second round of a further submission. So you get to comment on what other people want to inform the strategy. That's not the case under this process. And so there was some interest in the future review of the strategy, those members of the community having put submissions into the likes of the inclusion of the Bunnythorpe Business Park around Roberts and Richardson's Line and some of those other additions to stage 1 of Te Utanganui. and aside from that, I suppose some of the development community just waited breath as to whether they proceed with some of their plans if this does get adopted.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. A little along the lines of what the Mayor was inquiring about, how other similar tier councils have been progressing this. And you mentioned that in 2027 is the next review, which aligns again with the LTP process. So my feeling is that it's got a little bit lost perhaps in the noise of the LTP process. Is there an opportunity to separate it out from the timing in future?
Yes, we'd expect to have a much more significant lead-in period, both to relieve our officers in terms of preparing LTP programs and also the public in terms of what they can kind of take on as far as reading and writing submissions. There's pros and cons with respect to bundling it together from economies of scale, also people getting to understand the relationship between the two strategies a lot stronger, and then also some of the cons around if there's slightly different submission timeframes and things like that too close together. So this time around we'd expect, for instance, year 1, housing business needs assessment, year 2, FDS, year 3, LTP.
Oh, can I sorry, if I could just add to that, the FDS is also...
Sorry, Leanna, just move the, yeah.
Apologies. To inform the LTP. So if you have a bit of a lead time, and that means that there's more ability for that to occur.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And the second inquiry is around the size of the steering group, understanding there's only 3 from the city, 3 equally from the regional council, but is there an opportunity to did that work efficiently, and maybe I should inquire that to the members, whether there's a scope to increase the size of that working, the joint steering group? Is that a political decision, or is that a...
I think it's more a political decision. This council agreed to 3 and 3. Remembering it's the first iteration, I'd probably suggest that we'd widen the net a little bit further next time. Yeah.
Happy with that response. And that's all the questions. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Isbellin.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you both. I'm just looking at the implementation plan, and I just had a question about to what extent would the content of an implementation plan be derived from our existing asset management plans and LTP budget lines, and how much of it might be new work?
For them, almost certain that it would be deriving on work that's been confirmed, rather than speculating on what could happen, I suppose, because that then goes into more of an FDS review. We've had some good advice just recently from HUD, Housing and Urban Development, around some of the best practice implementation plans that have come about, just recognising it's first generation FDS for everybody across the country. New Plymouth District Council has quite an effective new implementation plan that doesn't go too far beyond, but gives what we would expect the development sector in particular and the communities need.
Sure, thank you. So we're sort of anticipating that all the information we might need is already in existence, and we're just pulling it together. Right, thank you. And with the next iteration of the FDS, when we do a review, you have a really handy list on page 9 of the FDS of work that's underway at the moment that would be sort of factored in. So can we anticipate that the FDS would get more specific and detailed in future iterations, or we're still trying to keep it quite high level?
Would still, sorry, through the chair, would still want to keep it high level, because again, its role on the policy hierarchy is to inform and guide, and with respect to have some concerns from the development sector in the engagement process of not getting too specific, appreciating that that's more what the role of a plan change is for. So it would be enriched, but not necessarily get down to the weeds. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thanks to you both for the report and all the work that's gone into it. Just a couple questions. One, for Horizons, has this been done with other local authorities as well, in particular Manawatu District?
No. So the requirement to develop a joint FDS only comes in for Tier 1 and Tier 2 local authorities. If one or two district decided to develop a future development strategy, then the requirement to jointly prepare it would jump in. So we would be involved at that point, but no other local authorities in our region have joined or developed an FDS, other than Horowhenua, who have been brought in as part of the Wellington Regional Leadership Committee's FDS.
Great, thank you. And just wanted to understand around the stormwater strategy that is signaled here, and I think we voted a small amount of investment to actually resource that. But could you give us some just initial perspective around scope and scale of that work so that we could have a little bit of sense of expectation around where that might go?
I'm happy for other officers to potentially comment. They might be closer to the action than I am. I possibly don't have enough information to answer that question myself. I'll refer to the Chief Planning Officer.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, David Murphy, Chief Planning Officer. Look, it's... Sorry.
You're on.
Very good. Through you, Mr. Mayor, David Murphy, Chief Planning Officer. It's still early days, but we see it very much being an overarching high-level document that is addressing stormwater in its totality across the city. So we're experiencing a significant number of stormwater issues at the moment, from as has been socialised in the past. Capacity limits are being reached for intensification. The expectations of the way in which we deliver stormwater in greenfield areas is different. The relationship to the role in which the regional council play in terms of their investment or otherwise in stop banks and the relationship to stormwater. So there is, we see it being very much a high-level overarching document that is providing direction to those thorny issues that keep emerging, particularly in relationship to growth and stormwater.
Thanks, that's helpful. And in terms of, is that work to commence in this year, or when?
Yes, it'll be commencing this, from 1 July.
Yeah, and is landing within that financial year?
My memory is the funding is available from year one. So we see the bulk of the work being undertaken in year one. I suspect completion of it may well continue into year two, but would see the bulk of the work undertaken in year one.
Great, thank you. That's very helpful, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions from me. Firstly, just around the cost of growth and how that's funded. Did you say it was 616 million over 30 years?
Yes, that's the total cost of growth programs that are coded for some portion of growth.
And that's the over 30 years?
Over 30 years.
Okay.
That is just the total program number. So if there's an apportionment to growth, it doesn't take the apportionment. It's the total.
So will it be more than that? Sorry, can you just explain the
We
apportionment?
expect the growth component to be less than that, but the total capital program cost, whether it's a mixture of growth and existing levels of service. Yeah,
So I understand we've got 300 million in the first 10 years. So is it split with a lot more weighting of the cost in the first 10 years as compared to the following 20 years?
At this point, that's where I stop being the expert. So I'll probably refer to others, possibly someone in finance, if they might know the answer.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I don't have that detail at hand, but certainly when we're bringing new greenfield areas online, typically the investment is upfront. And we also are experiencing more significant growth. Our projections indicate that there's more significant growth in the earlier part, or the first half of that 30 years than the second half. So it would be expected that there is a greater proportion of growth cost within the first, half or 10 years of the 30-year window.
Okay. Just wanting to understand how much of the cost of growth is covered by growth as opposed to being needing to be subsidised by ratepayers who aren't experiencing that growth. The information that came through from CAM yesterday said that 262 million of subsidies, grants and developer agreements were included in the next 10 years. Do we have, so that shows about 38 million shortfall in the first 10 years. Do we have any understanding of that split over 30 years? Of how much of growth, the cost of growth is needing to be subsidised by the general ratepayer?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, not having the full detail in front of me, but just a clarification. So the note that I sent through that refers to the number of 262 million is more around the external funded programs in the long-term plan. So 125 million of that is growth-related programs that would either be funded by developer agreements or potential IFF type funding. The remainder of growth would be funded through the development contributions revenue that we would be expecting to receive over the 10-year period.
Yep, thank you. And just my second question relates to page 77 of the Future Development Strategy and under affordability and funding of growth. And it talks about, on the second side of that page, that it's still subject to an application to Crown Infrastructure Partners, and if the application is to be unsuccessful, this may impact the shape of our growth strategy. So I'm just wondering, with that level of uncertainty around the funding of it, if there is change to be made, how does that, if we approve this now, how does any change occur going forward if the uncertainty around that actually eventuates?
Through the chair. Often the rubber hitting the road point is through a district plan change. So the consideration of serviceability of a growth area would include a better interrogation of can those services be funded and demonstrated to be funded. So most recently, Okotiri was an example of that. And if that changed either the size, timing, priority or quantum of the way that growth area itself would be delivered or planned to be delivered, that would then inform a review of the future development strategy in that 3-year cycle.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Just, if I could just ask a question back to officers, because, I mean, the council has asked this a few times, and I think it's good to clarify. My understanding is growth doesn't pay 100% for itself because there is some social, cultural, environmental benefits. Is that correct? And that it might be an 80-20 split or a 90-10 or 70-30? Because that's quite important to understand.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. Technically, growth does pay for growth. So once we make a decision on any program, for instance, if it's there are a number of programs in the LTP that have a proportion of growth versus a proportion of level of service. So a lot of infrastructure that we provide doesn't purely benefit growth, it also provides a benefit to existing ratepayers. So once we make a decision that a program is, for instance, say 50% growth, 50% level of service, then that 50% growth component is entirely captured by development levies. So it is true to say growth pays for growth, but each piece of infrastructure is different and delivers different benefits to different benefactors.
Okay, that's good to understand, because it's been asked a few times and I don't think we've got probably, that's the clearest answer I've got. Councillor Johnson. Online.
Okay.
Yes.
Thanks, Keegan. It's just a process question, really. I noted that there were some amendments proposed by one of the panel during the deliberations that were not agreed to by the rest of the panel. And then subsequently post-deliberations, some of those amendments were then made by agreement with staff and the chair and the mayor. So can you explain to me how that process works? Because that's quite unusual, I would have thought.
I'll refer to the Chief Planning Officer to give a probably more succinct answer than I could.
again, through you, Mr. Mayor. Those further minor amendments that were made, they were raised by a member of the Regional Council. I think the officers received them at 11 p.m. And the hearing was the following day, starting at 9 a.m. So the officers were unable to effectively respond to them in an appropriate manner at the hearing. And for want of a better term, they were sort of put to one side or kicked to touch, and appreciate that the Joint Committee made a decision to not approve those minor amendments. Subsequently, there was a further discussion between the Chair of the Regional Council and the Mayor around those. Officers looked at those, with the benefit of more time. We feel that those amendments are minor. They don't change the final outcome of the future development strategy. Balanced growth is still the outcome. We're conscious from a transparency perspective that those minor amendments and that process, and I can understand why you'd be answering that question, Councillor Johnson, and for that reason they're explicitly identified and asked to be approved as a separate recommendation, as recommendation 1 in the report today. So if the council was not of a mind to approve those minor amendments because they had concerns about the process that had followed, I don't think it's consequential to the final FDS. Balanced growth would still be the outcome, but we're conscious of the way in which those have come about, and for that reason they're explicitly identified as additional recommendation in the officer report.
Okay, thank you. I will have a comment later.
All right, that's the comments gone. So thank you. Sorry, questions. So thank you to the officers. You're released, and thank you for that work. Look, councillors, we've got a number of recommendations. If we can just get those back up on screen, please. All right, and this is around recommendations to council that we agree to amending tables 8, 9 and 12 for the future development strategy to correct the scoring associated with the 2 criteria: a city with minimal environmental impacts, and second, a city that prioritises the Māori and health water bodies and connections to them, as outlined in section 4 of the memorandum. 2, that council adopt the Palmerston North Future Development Strategy Attachment 1 as amended and as recommended by the Future Development Strategy Joint Steering Group, including additional amendments detailed in Recommendation 1 of the memorandum. Number 3, that council confirm that A, the adoption of the Palmerston North Future Development Strategy is a significant decision, and B, the strategy has been developed in compliance with the decision-making and consultation requirements of the Local Government Act 2002. 2002. And that is it. I'm happy to move those, seconded by Councillor Dennison. And look, councillors, a lot of work's gone in the background. Just want to acknowledge the officers with both councils. Look, it's the first iteration of doing this work, but in saying that, I think Councillor Zabellan teased out the questions. It's taking everything that already exists. So we're not really creating anything new. We're just pulling everything together, joining the dots. For the steering group members that were with me, I just want to acknowledge Councillor Johnson and Councillor Harper that were there with myself. It was evident that we were bringing some people up to, up to date with what the city is doing in terms of all of our plans. And that's fair enough, because our colleagues primarily play in the environmental space. So it's informed by, it's a macro level document, it's informed by the spatial plan a lot, and I think it shows the great work that the city's done in that respect. I think we're up to our 3rd iteration of the spatial plan, and that really helps us guide development in a bigger sense. And also various growth plans, transport plans, infrastructure plans. You know, it's informed by the district plan, but also has to engage with the RMA Act, the Local Government Act. But I think if you look at the appendices on the actual document itself, you can see all the different all the different pieces of plans that come in around flood protection, electricity and gas networks, transport plans. There was so much to take in that it was a great bit of work in the sense of pulling all that together. Liquefaction, high-class soils, erosion, our state highway network in terms of transport, the rail network, air routes, national grid, local power, gas networks, you name it, it was all there. So a lot of work to pull this all together. Again, I would have to say that if we had our time again, I probably would have a joint workshop with both councils, because it was evident that some members didn't really understand some of the stuff that we do on a regular basis, and that would have been helpful for our colleagues. And I sense that some still don't understand what we're doing. Also, I would include perhaps Maratu District, or certainly invite them if they were interested, because they are our closest neighbour and they do link with us on a number of different projects, certainly with transport and logistics and distribution, just two that I would name. So again, thank you to my colleagues and to our regional colleagues as well. It's actually been quite an interesting process. And when you think about the amount of work that's just gone into this one alongside the LTP, it's been a huge, huge undertaking. So thank you, and hope you all support this. Councillor Hapeta.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm very happy to support this recommendation, all these recommendations going forward. As a member of the panel, it was a very good panel to be on, and I just have to correct you a little bit. We did have the workshops with our colleagues, and we did go through all of this with them in workshop, and we, from a consultation point of view, we did hear the community, and looking at the report, we actually made quite a few changes to the strategy as a result of the consultation process, which I'm really proud of, because it's quite hard to have a strategy and go out and not make changes to it, but actually we did do that. But in listening to what Councillor Dennison did in his questioning, I actually did have a problem with it being at the same time as the long-term plan. So I actually do think that in future, I think it should be at a different time. I did hear what the officers said, but going forward, I do think these things should be at a different time, because I think people get overloaded. But I do think this was a very, very good plan and strategy, and we had a very good consultation. The officers did very good work. I do think it was good working with Horizons, but it was hard because we aren't on the same page, and we do need to be on the same page going forward. So we do need to work together going forward, because we are a different council to them. But we do need to keep working harder to keep working on the same page. And I think bringing MDC into this in future is probably a very good idea. So I do think it was very good work of our officers and their officers to get it over the line. So congratulations to all of us.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and acknowledge and support your comments and those of Councillor Hoppeta as well. Good to hear from those who are on the inside. Very much do see this as a useful addition to the city's and to the region's planning framework. Real value in getting at least a more aligned view, if not perfectly aligned yet, view around development and in strengthening those city and regional links and relationships. As a document itself, too, it's an incredibly good information resource. Like, there's a lot of really good, useful, ready-to-hand information there, and would acknowledge the great work that's been done by the project team to actually bring a really useful set of information together in a clear and accessible way for the community. Really, before this, we did kind of have, we were on quite different pages, and while we might not yet be on exactly the same page, this has certainly done something, I think, to really help bring the city and region closer to a view of how things look going forward, and coming at development from a shared and joined up kind of approach is quite valuable, given the role that the regional council has around environmental protection and regulation, and the role that we have as well, and would quite concur that in future having Manawatu District, or at least Fielding, closely involved in this part of the process would be helpful. This did attract some real constituent interest, which was good to see. There are submissions in particular around Te Tonganui, including some new submissions and new perspectives, and in my view, those were quite appropriately responded to by the panel, so you can see it as being useful while it was a busy consultation time in actually driving some positive change through that community consultation process. So, despite some despite some bumps along the way, I do see this as quite a good outcome, and gives us a good basis to work forward from. I will say I do have continued concerns around the cost and sustainability implications of continued reliance on greenfields, but acknowledge that is a direction this council has chosen to take. Also acknowledges some of the challenges along the way that has led us to needing to specifically consider recommendation 1, but I think it's better that we get there through that path. So I am prepared to support this as our best collective effort to work across 2 councils to get a joined up view of how we do plan and approach the future. Thank you.
Councillor Bellin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I agree that the FDS sort of presents a best case scenario, and I'm happy to support it because it does acknowledge in there that if something can't be funded, then it just can't go ahead. I think it's really healthy to acknowledge what our financial and geographical limits are, and completely support Councillor Barrett's comments that this represents the best collective effort at putting together what growth would look like in an ideal situation, and also puts in some buffer in there in case those ideal situations don't actually pan out. So well done to everyone who worked on this. Did sit in on some of the hearings and they were absolutely fascinating. Thank you.
Yes, I can recall you in the gallery. Councillor Johnson, online.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just to make a few comments. First, I was very glad to be a member of the panel and found it useful. I will say that I think it was sufficient of a challenge to be trying to get agreement with one other council, and to draw Manawatu District Council into the mix as well, I think would add another layer of difficulty. So I'll just caution members before they get too enthusiastic about trying to get a tripartite agreement. The second comment I want to make is that this was quite a significant commitment in terms of time for those who were on the panel, both in terms of the workshop and preparation beforehand, the draft, sitting through the hearings and listening to submissions, and then the deliberations. And I think those who are to be appointed to any future panel need to factor this in. It's not going to work if members don't engage with the material until the very last moment. There's a considerable amount of work that needs to go into this ahead of time. So I'd just like that to be on the record as well. My further observation is that I think it would actually be helpful to have a number of members from both sides who have done the RMA training, because where this fits in, how it fits in with plan changes, how it fits in with the higher order planning documents, I think is quite important. And if that's lost, we're certainly lost on some submitters. If it's lost on the members of the panel, then that also can create a problem. And just finally about the changing of the details after the event, I accept the Chief Planning Officer's explanation that officers were given virtually no advance warning of the changes that were proposed, and certainly there's no reflection on the officers. I'm not very happy with the way that went down, to be perfectly honest. However, in the interests of being flexible and collegial, I will vote for it, but I think it sets a bad precedent. And so I just want on record that I'm not really very happy with the way that happened. However, all in all, I think it is a really helpful and useful document for us as a council, and well, worth the time and effort that went into producing it. So thank you to the officers who did an excellent job, I felt, and also to the other members of the panel. Thanks.
Right, thank you, councillors. And look, just if I could just sum up and just in a writer reply, this is a balanced plan, and I think those that did come to some of the hearings and heard the submissions We are geographically challenged in terms of high-class soils around us, and also the financial limitations that we have. So we're not punch drunk on growth, but we do, with things like this plan and also our spatial plan, it does give us some sort of idea where growth can occur if and when the conditions allow that. Could I just say too that we did make a number of changes, and I agree with all the comments, and that was unusual for a plan of this size and all the components to it. So that was in some ways quite brave, and I acknowledge the officers for putting up some of those potential changes from submitters, and it just shows that it is worth submitting, because often we get criticised as a sector that you submit and we've just got a preconceived idea and we just go ahead. Well, actually we didn't. We did listen to submissions. We couldn't obviously please 100% of people, but I just want to have a shout out for the Bunnythorpe community, because they did submit to it in some numbers, that we've ensured in the plan that the proposed ring road, if it ever happens, won't go through the middle of them. And I think Councillor Hancock can send that message back to our friends in Bunnythorpe, because they do have some real fears of their unique village, and it's never been the intention of this council to bisect them or go through the middle of them. So, but unfortunately plans and some of our partners have never really said that to them. So we've put that in writing and locked it in stone in the plan, so that hopefully will give them some comfort anyway, that they'll be involved in any planning going forward. So if I could ask you to support this, please. Good bit of work. First iteration. We'll get better as we go on, but just want to acknowledge everybody that's been part of it, and if you could vote, please. That is passed. 16 votes for and none against. Thank you.